Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. So our Perspective series is aimed at highlighting state and national trends in the work that survivors, service providers, activists, and thought leaders are engaged with in Florida and nationally. For each edition of Perspectives, we choose a theme, and this month's theme is the vulnerability to coercion that's created by the lack of support for children who are aging out of the foster care system. We have an incredible group of panelists with us today. And I want to take a moment and welcome all of them. I want to kind of give you a little bit of background on who we're talking with. So firstly, I want to thank Christy Gillis of the Florida Department of Children and Families for joining us today. She's been with the Department of Children and Families since March of 2020 and is currently serving as a community development administrator within Circuit 7. She brings a wealth of community-based experience working with and on behalf of children involved in foster care, the juvenile justice system, and with mental and behavioral health needs. Also, as a part of her vast work experience, Christy previously served as a regional advocate as part of the Open Doors Outreach Network, which serves survivors of sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation aged 10 to 24 throughout the state of Florida. On that note, I also want to give a big welcome to Dionne. She joins us from the Delores Barr Weaver Policy Center located in the Jacksonville area, where she currently serves as a regional advocate with the Open Doors Outreach Network. Previously, Chanel has worked within the network as a survivor mentor and has an impressive history of working to elevate the voices of survivors of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. Part of that is Chanel published a book about her experiences as a survivor in 2015, which sold over 1,000 copies in the first 6 months of publication. In addition to her impressive work in the field, Chanel is currently pursuing a degree in sociology and plans to continue her work towards becoming a licensed clinical social worker. Our next panelist is Frederick, the Chief Executive Officer of the FLITE Center based in the Fort Lauderdale area. The FLITE Center works to guide youths transitioning out of foster care and other vulnerable youth transitioning into independence. Christine holds a Master of Social Work degree from Barr University and an executive certification in nonprofit management from Florida Atlantic University. In addition to her direct experience at the FLITE Center, Christine has an extensive history comprised of both direct services and leadership roles, executive specifically, serving children in the Broward County area. And our final panelist today is Kayla O'Neill. She is joining us from Tallahassee Community College. Kayla received her undergraduate degree from the University of Florida in criminology and law and African American studies. She has previously worked with youth, mentored at-risk individuals, and served as hotline volunteer for over a year at the Alachua County Volunteer Victim Services and Rape Crisis Center. She obtained her master's in social work from Florida State University and has worked facilitating group and individual counseling for adolescents and young adults before joining Tallahassee Community College as the case manager. As case manager, Kayla oversees various programs for the college, including an on-campus market emergency relief fund, and specifically the Emerging Eagles program, which is geared towards foster youth transitioning to adulthood in the community college setting. She's proud to be a member of Positive Pathways and making connections within the Tallahassee area to provide students who have aged out with resources and support. In this panel specifically, we're looking to discuss what happens when dependent children turn 18 or 21 in some states, and how the limited systematic support for this population creates a vacuum of services, how this vacuum impacts a highly traumatized group of young adults. In this conversation, we'll connect this gap in services with the prevalence of commercial exploitation and sex trafficking among the young adults who are affected. Our panelists are definitely interested in hearing your questions and comments. The best way to do that today is to use the question and answer function. You can see it in the bottom next to the chat function. It says Q&A. Use the chat for general chat, talking, things like that. For questions specifically, because of the large number of participants we have, please use the Q&A function. We'll be answering as many as we can during our discussion. However, we will also be answering some of them via text in the Q&A function. I'll be moderating. Lauren, my name is Lauren, and I'm the Training and Education Coordinator with Voices for Florida. So a little bit about our population. We know that exploitation and trafficking can and does happen to anyone. But children and young adults who have a history of involvement with the child welfare system are disproportionately affected by coercion. According to the National Foster Youth Institute, approximately 60% of reported victims of commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking have been involved in the welfare system. This is particularly pertinent for those who, once reaching 18 or 21, are stripped of supports and often faced with the very real question of how they will survive. This creates an environment that allows for traffickers and other abusers to easily manipulate and coerce victims. Our conversation is going to discuss what these conditions look like for those aging out and how the prevalence of trauma interacts with trafficking and some of the major gaps in needs and services for this population. So starting off, we're going to kind of talk about what aging out of foster care looks like, what it means for those affected by it, and then how that interacts with trafficking specifically. So first off, for the children who become adults while in the foster care system, what is the situation they're faced with? Christine, because of the work that the FLITE Center does with youth and young adults involved with the welfare system, can we start with you on that question?
Sure. So really for youth who are exiting the foster care system, what are they faced with? They're faced with surviving, which is often what I'll say to people. They are trying to figure out how they're excited. Let me say that some days, right? Like, so on that 18th birthday, they're excited because they have become an adult. And at the same time, they're equally terrified, because what does becoming an adult mean? Right now, on your 18th birthday, you have to move on that day. So it's like, happy birthday, you're being displaced. For some of them, they see it as freedom, right? That they're now going to have some sense of freedom coming to them. They're going to be able to make some choices and decisions for themselves. They may be out of a group home setting or something like that. But mostly, it's terrifying. Mostly they're looking at how are they going to sustain themselves? How are they going to survive especially depending on their environment, in a situation where so many people are having a hard time surviving financially. A lot of times where exploitation begins, if it has not already begun by that age, is by the promise of doing better than surviving. Of, okay, you know, I'll give you extra money. You'll have these extra things. I'll take care of you. I'll own you, but I'm going to take care of you in some way. And there's some form of trade-off there that sometimes is presented to our young people. And so it's just a lot of, it's a lot of that piece of it, of like, I have to find a way to keep pushing forward and living on my own somehow and sustaining myself, that our young people are faced with. And this is often, as is when they are in foster care, if they are exploited while they're in foster care, again, it's about what can they get? What are they getting out of it? What is someone offering to them in exchange for, you know, what it is that they're going to exploit them for, put them through? What is the exchange that they're offering there, if any at all?
Thank you for that, Christine. Kind of piggybacking off of that, Kayla, I want to talk about your experience with the students you work with. What are some of the challenges that Christine mentioned that they face, or what are some of the things you've seen with students you work with?
Yes, so piggybacking off of Christine, it's, as she said, you know, they're in survival mode. How am I gonna find somewhere to live? What am I going to eat? And many people take advantage of that. They don't know many of their resources. They're kind of just thrown out there. Many college students, when they come to college, they may have support from parents or a family to help kind of guide them into adulthood. And many of these people, they don't have anyone. They don't know where to go for these resources. Some of the smallest things that other college students might see as very minuscule, as, oh, okay, I just need to do my FAFSA. For these students, it's, well, how do I do that? Or, you know, I'm filing as an independent. I've never done that before. A lot of this information, I don't know where to get this information from. You know, maybe I don't know how to obtain my records. So there's many obstacles. And though there are many resources out there for some of these students, they don't know how to obtain them. Especially those who may be in more metropolitan cities or in a bigger city, there might be more resources there, as where in a rural place like Tallahassee, we may not have as many resources as those who are in a bigger metropolitan area. So trying to connect those students, trying to figure out who these students are, because just like I might not know who they are. They might not know who to reach out to. So there are many different obstacles that comes with aging out, and then trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to go through adulthood? And then adding on top of that, okay, I'm in college. How am I going to navigate through college and work on my academics and try and be successful and get to where I want to be? So when you think one thing, there might be something else. So that's why I'm here to try and make that a little easier, but there are many different obstacles that those may not think about that are there.
That's a great point. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how well there are programs to support this youth because of the lack of access, support, or knowledge of these programs. There's just inherent barriers. We're going to kind of talk about that a lot more later in this discussion, but that's a really great point bringing up. So kind of rounding out this topic and this question right here, Chanel and Christy, either one of you can start off with this. Because you've worked specifically with survivors of trafficking and exploitation, how are these gaps, these vulnerabilities that Kayla and Christine are talking about, and these situations that they're put in almost immediately, how does this contribute to the exploitation or the coercion aspect of their victimization? I'll go ahead and start with you, Chanel. That's okay.
So I think that just kind of listening to Kayla and Christine, the things that I have really seen with the survivors that we work with is that it just continues to really just open up the window for the exploitation to continue and be perpetuated. And so a lot of the times, you know, because they have this relationship with providers in their lives where it's this power over dynamic instead of a power with relationship. And so because they come from this space of always feeling like somebody is playing like this authoritative level over them, they're looking for not only a sense of wanting to survive, but they're also wanting that sense of freedom too. And so a lot of the times the traffickers, they portray themselves as someone who's wanting to be helpful. And so in our work, we call it like predatory helpfulness, where they present themselves as someone that wants to help, but in reality, they're predators and they're out to prey. And so because, you know, they have these barriers to the resources that are available to them, because the people that are presenting them with the help, they see them as authoritative figures. They see them as someone that are against them and that are not with them. It makes them, you know, more vulnerable to, you know, being trafficked, to where whether or not they're already being trafficked or makes the exploitation continue.
Thank you, Chanel. And actually, I have a question from the audience that I want to kind of gear towards you, Christy. So is there like an exit plan done for these students or for these individuals as they're leaving? Is there okay, we know you're going to be aging out soon. Is there something mandated by the welfare system?
So within the child welfare system, there are staffings that occur with the youth to talk about what their plan is at 18. They have the option, if they're in foster care, to stay in extended foster care, or there's another program called PEZ. And so really it's up to that child or as they turn 18, but it's up to that youth to decide which route that they want to go. The important thing is making sure that the proper individuals are at the table to maybe be able to explain additional support services, having someone with the expertise related to sex trafficking and being able to talk to your children's services are very different than your adult services, and be able to connection with, excuse me, have that single point of connection, maybe to help crosswalk them on what is available. So there are opportunities to make sure that services and supports are set up and are in place, but it's up to the individual. And you know, there may be people that aren't at the table that don't have their best intentions, that are communicating with those individuals. Come with me, I'll help take care of you. So you know, we want to offer as many positive supports as we can and be that positive person at those staffings to help them.
Thank you for that. That was definitely a point that some of the people in the audience were looking to have answered. So they can kind of get a picture of what the whole process looks like. We're going to kind of go on and move into a little bit of a similar topic, but a little bit different as well. We know that for children who remain in the care system, especially those in long periods of time, and as they get older, there's a lot of lack of stability. There's a lot of rapid transitions throughout their whole development period. How does this like transitional and often rapidly changing and kind of unsettling experience in their lives kind of fail them to prepare for aging out, fail them to, maybe like know who their key support people will be as adults, or know what forms they need, or how to access things like Kayla talked about, like your FAFSA or things like that. Let's go ahead and start with Christy, since this is, again, working with DCF. You have a really good experience, well-rounded with this population.
I was trying to read some of the panel questions. Can you repeat the question? I was trying to go in and read some of the Q&As and talk about.
Absolutely. So how has like the lack of stability that our foster care kids kind of face, and rapid transitions, and not always having a stable support system outside of the welfare system, how does that set them up kind of for failure sometimes in terms of knowing how to transition, like you talked about with knowing who their key people need to be at the table, essentially?
It definitely is a challenge, because so many people from the system are seeing, you're from the system, you're help making choices. It's that struggle of being independent. I helped work with a youth this was probably 20 years ago, that had experienced trauma and really needing that lifelong mentor. Met with her, once she turned 18, and being a part of the system was saying, go to hell, all of you. I don't want to be, I don't want to be in any of your systems. I can do this on my own. But the thing was, she still had her people that she was able to contact for help and support. So that's the important thing, is meeting people where they are. As kids turn 18, they want to be able to have to make those choices, and being able to respect that, but making sure that if you're going to be there for them, that you're going to be there for them, and meeting them where they are. And you have to be able to accept that, and accept the choices that they're making. And maybe as supportive adults, we're thinking of plan B, C, and D for when they do come back and they are ready to make that maybe better choices to help engage in those supports, so that they can get the help that they need.
Thank you for that. I think that point of meeting them where they are, and knowing that even though you have their best interests at heart, you may not be the person they want to talk to, it is such a crucial part of it, just because of the involvement with the system in general.
Yeah, and also being able to accept, having previously worked in the Open Doors Outreach Network, I still have some of my old survivors that they know how to reach me at DCF and do check-ins. And even, again, writing a letter and, just like, are you okay? Do you need anything? And if they want help, they know that you are there to be able to answer for them.
Thank you for that, Christy. I kind of want to follow up with Chanel and Christine, because you are part of that outside network, those people that they go to. How do these gaps kind of perpetuate these challenges? Like these kind of, if you're not there, if your program doesn't exist, because we know there's parts of Florida where your programs don't exist, what do you see in those places?
I see, for me, I see desperation. And so a lot of the times we know, like, what happens when people are sometimes desperate, sometimes, that creeps in, it opens up the window for victimization to occur. A lot of the times survivors feel as though, they need to try and make money a fast way. And so, I oftentimes hear, people talk about wanting to enter into the strip club in order to make fast money, because one of the things that comes with being in the extended foster care is needing to meet a qualifier. So, when you're in foster care under 18, there isn't this requirement of if you check off the list of these boxes and you get these services. Well, in extended foster care, it's requirements that you have to meet. And a lot of the times they're not prepared for that transition. So in their mind, they're still thinking like, this is just foster care and I'm 18, when it's not like that, where now they have, these stipulations to where if you're not in school, if you're not working at least 20 hours per week or in some type of job training class or skill classes, then you could be subject to being terminated from the program. And so a lot of the times they're not really clear about that understanding because they didn't have someone at the table who was able to really fully explain what the dynamics of extended foster care is and what it truly looks like. And so as a result, you see people going, remaining in survival mode, becoming desperate. And a lot of the times when you're desperate, sometimes you have limited access to choices. And you may meet someone who wants to prey on your vulnerabilities, and then the trafficking happens.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I was going to see if you had anything you wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely second what what has been said already. But what was happening before in Broward County was that the youth were we were finding them at the central terminal, the bus terminal, right? Because that was kind of like the central gathering place where you can get to anywhere in the county, where everyone kind of interface through in terms of traveling and things like that. So we in Broward County, although we now have the FLITE Center that is meant to avoid these gaps and meant to be the catch-all and meant to make sure that young people do have access to these services and knowledge of access to these services, or they could have no knowledge of these services for whatever reason, and they walk through our door and they're connected right at that moment. As being part of a drop-in center, we also lived in a world prior to FLITE Center's creation where this did not exist, and where what was happening was exactly what Chanel was saying, which is that, young people are trying to, again, it goes back to survival. We had, young people that we were interfacing with at Covenant House, which is our community's homeless shelter. I know they're a national, model and program as well, but here in Broward, they, housed, the homeless youth population. We had Broward County Central Terminal, and that was pretty much what was going on. This is where we were finding our youth. And so we knew very quickly that we needed to do something different in terms of educating them prior to 18, and to there being a supportive network beyond 18, where they could always drop back into and come into to get reconnected with services. To Chanel's point, they do have to meet certain indicators and markers in order to be eligible for some of these services. What FLITE has done in particular is create a framework of, okay, what happens when they are not eligible for EFC or PES? What are we able to serve them with in the meantime while we work on their eligibility, so that they're still not homeless, that they're still not trying to scrape by and figure out how they can get back to school for the purpose of getting back onto EFC stipend or getting into PES? What happens in the meantime? How do you get a kid back into school or working when they're working from a park bench? So we started to really build the framework of what that looks like in terms of putting in emergency triage services, having an emergency safe landing space where youth can live, where they can kind of propel themselves forward from there with the purpose of getting to reach sustainability. So certainly, the first piece is education, is letting them know what they're eligible for, and letting them know what will meet the eligibility. How do we avoid becoming ineligible? And if you're not going to be eligible, what other pieces of resources or framework can we put in place in order to make sure that it's not either eligibility or homelessness? That seems to be the two options, right? If you're eligible and there's a plan, there's a plan. If not, you're homeless and everything is devastating. There's no in between. And so this is what we've worked hard on in Broward County, but it was not always so. It was not always the case. And we came from a place of where that was very much happening in our community, worked very hard to create a system, a network that would avoid from that happening.
Thank you for that. You guys gave some really excellent answers, and we of course have a lot of great questions that are being asked here in the chat. And one example is just with acronym explanation. Can you say what PES means for the group? Anyone?
Post-secondary education services and support. So PES is really what happens when youth graduate from, they receive a high school credential, could have been GED or high school diploma, and they enroll into post-secondary education, whether it's a certification program or higher education. They move into almost like what will be like a phase 2 of their post foster care support services. And again, EFC stands for extended foster care, which is what they're eligible for right upon turning 18. They could still be in high school, and things like that, you know, knowing obviously they might not be ready for PES, the post-secondary education program at that time.
Thank you so much for that. So that's kind of just a brief, very brief introduction into what this world looks like for our individuals who are aging out. We could spend a whole 3-hour webinar just talking about that specific topic. But I did want to kind of dive into the trauma present, both in youth who are in foster care and aging out of foster care, and then specifically to the youth that have been trafficked or exploited as children, who are part of the foster care system. So we know that the amount of trauma present in survivors of commercial exploitation is multifaceted. It's numerous, and it's exacerbated typically by lack of familial or social supports, and it's consistent or stable living situations. You talked a little bit about this above, Chanel, but can you talk about some of the ways that like lack of family or social supports and living conditions creates trauma specifically among the young adults you've worked with?
Yes, and so just to kind of add to what I kind of already stated, I think a lot of the times, you know, when survivors don't have the family support available, a lot of the times they're already like out searching for someone to kind of fill that gap. And as a result, a lot of the times the people that they interact with become people who prey on their vulnerabilities. And so a lot of the times, you know, we see a lot of sexual assaults happens. They end up in domestic violence situations as a result of, you know, seeking to fill that gap of not having the the family support. And I think that thankfully, like as being a survivor mentor, sometimes we kind of get to step in and kind of be a support, somebody that can show up and be there. But a lot of the times, you know, they want that, everybody wants to be connected to a family. And a lot of times they don't have that. And so they seek that. And sometimes the response comes from, you know, those who want to prey on their vulnerabilities.
Thank you so much for that information. And just following up a little bit on that, did anyone else on the panel kind of want to talk about their experiences with trauma with this population, or what they've seen relating to exploitation specifically?
I would like to say just how Chanel said, oftentimes they're looking for support in other ways, especially with aging out of a system. Oftentimes they don't want to be part of another system, or you know, me as the case manager at TCC, it's like, okay, well, I probably already had a case manager while I was in the system, so I don't want another case manager. So then it often poses difficulty with, you know, I may have resources or support or other things that may be helpful to the student, but because of the trauma they faced or the other barriers they had to overcome with being a part of the child welfare system, then you know, they often are guarded, and they're like, well, you know, does this person have the best interest for me at heart? Do they really know exactly what I need? And oftentimes it's it just makes it a little difficult for them to be receptive to getting services, just because of the trauma that they did face.
In working with youth that have wanted to stay in independent living and have wanted to stay in foster care, when I've been at those staffings, really having the conversation when they say, I want to go to independent living, and say, and let them know, like, independent living is not a town, it's a skill. And independent living doesn't give you the place to come home to at Christmas time for a meal. It's not going to be there to hold your hand to walk you down the aisle if you get married. It's not going to be the house at Thanksgiving. It's a skill. And really trying to open them up to, these are your support systems, these are your people. And again, meeting them where they are. So sometimes you have to have those tough conversations about what independent, you know, what is independent living, what is PES, and even getting people to think outside of the box. When we think of, you know, when I remember when I turned 18 and I said, you know, I'm ready to move out, I'm ready to leave, and then went to look for an apartment with a friend, and then started counting out my bills. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good staying home because I don't have any money to do anything else. And it's important to have those conversations with the youth, because they're, sometimes they may not be used to managing their own money. And so let's look at what is an apartment, how much is it going to be for groceries? And again, having those real conversations with them where they are is helpful.
Thank you for that. Those are all just excellent points kind of about how each of you intersect with these young adults and the youth prior to turning into young adults. So I greatly appreciate your input on this topic. Staying in the realm of discussing trauma, within trauma-informed care and working with individuals with trauma, we know that consistency and managing periods of transition are two of the primary tenets of really providing adequate and appropriate trauma care. And it's how we prevent activating their trauma responses when working with them. Christine, I want to start with you. Can you talk about the barriers you see in supporting youth because of their trauma responses on high alert and what that looks like working with the young adults you work with?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the barriers are obviously that some of our young people are so traumatized and so I guess kind of like tired of systemic approaches or systems professionals that they just kind of retreat. That's where I explained kind of like some youth are excited, on their 18th birthday, they're like, I'm out of here, bye, never to see you guys again, don't want anything to do with you, even though they may need the support, but they just feel like everything they've experienced or maybe some negative interactions with some systems professionals have led them to feel like they just are done, right? Our youth are, something that we have to remember is that our youth are having a normal reaction to abnormal things that have happened in their life, right? So if they had no response at all, if they had no reaction at all, that would be not normal, right? That would be like abnormal to have no reaction to having been, sexually victimized and things like that. However, I think that sometimes our young people feel like they're expected to have no reaction. Sometimes as system professionals, we get frustrated with some of our young people's reactions to things and their behavior. And we don't realize that they are, it's kind of like, when you touch a hot stove and you get burned, are you going to touch it again? If they have had a negative reaction or interaction while they've been in the system, they're reluctant to have that trust and allow that rapport to be built to open themselves up to vulnerability again. And so they are kind of like, no, I've already been down this road and journey. And even though you might be a whole new system professional, a whole new program that's trying to come at them, they are kind of systematized already in their mind where they're like, no, thank you. I already know what this comes with. This comes with, being let down. This comes with being judged. This comes with you saying you're going to do something and not do it. If they're a young parent, maybe this comes with you keeping an eye on me to see if you have to take my baby. There's a lot of different things that come along, with that trauma response, framework. And again, sometimes our youth who have already been exploited are looking at, okay, well, what are you going to get out of this, right? What do you want from me that you're asking me to do this? What do I have to do for you? And so again, it's really creating safety around that young person, making them feel safe and know that they're safe, and really putting actions to your words in regards to what it is that you are going to do for them, what you can do, and what you're going to follow through with, because so much of their trauma is built off of them being let down and being exploited or having to do something in order to get help in return.
I think all of those points are kind of really just echoing what we've said before, is that even though you as a person or your program is not the one that has really disappointed or provided the trauma, that doesn't mean that they're not going to transfer their feelings about what's happened to them to you as a provider. And it's not a personal thing, it's just a natural reaction to abnormal circumstances. I really liked what you said.
Yeah, 1000%. And they come in angry sometimes. It's happened at FLITE Center, and we like really work. I mean, everybody knows it's like an ongoing joke at Flight Center how I feel about us having a very good employee morale and having a very good environment at Flight Center because of how we receive youth. But they'll come in angry sometimes, and I've had to remind staff, and we've had to remind each other that the likelihood is that that young person is not angry at you. They're just angry. They might be hungry. They might not have been able to shower. They might be exhausted because they slept on a park bench or hiding from rain that was falling that night. You know, down here in South Florida, it's hot, it's rainy, it's whatever. And so a lot of times they're just coming in expecting for people to already have like, oh, look at this one. They have an attitude. This is whatever. And they come in already with all of those defenses built. And a lot of times they're not even angry at the person that they're directing the anger at. They're just imploding at that point. And what happens when you implode so much is that you start to explode, right? It starts to, your cup overfloweth type of thing with anger, you know?
I want to bring it back. It's so important to meet people where they are. Don't take it personal if someone cusses you out, because at the moment they can't get what they need, because you don't know, 5 minutes later, you may be hugging them and crying with them because you're so proud of the positive choice that they made. So no, you can't take it personally. And as individuals that are supporting these youth, it's important too that we have those supports to process how we're being responded to. If we're getting cussed out, that we have someone that we can talk to, because it's very hard work. It's very challenging. It's very draining. We've all left meetings or, gotten, maybe a youth has, like I said, cussed us out. I'm out the door and you're heartbroken. And, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be upset, and making sure as support systems that we have people that we can talk to as well.
I absolutely agree. And I definitely, everything Christine was saying really brought me back to what you were talking about earlier, Christy, in terms of, sometimes you want to provide this planning, you want to provide the support, and the young adult is just not in the place to hear it from you because you are a part of the system. And that's just something crucial to keep in mind, and why we have to have a wide variety of resources for these individuals so that something might stick. Chanel, before I move on, I wanted to talk with Kayla a little bit about how this affects students, but did you have anything you wanted to add from your perspective regarding the trauma response and gaps?
No, I think everyone really touched on everything. I would just, if I had to add something, I would just really say, I just think that it's important that we just kind of, just check our hearts and minds at the door, because a lot of the times, like what I do see, some of the ways that we create barriers within the work too is, our own biases sometimes get in the way. And a lot of times we have to just continue to remind ourselves that, we cannot take it personal, and that, what they're experiencing is, it's a lot and it's heavy. And, a lot of the time the anger piece is, it's a blanket over what's truly wrong and what's truly happened. And sometimes it masks the pain, and, you just want to, you don't want to talk about it. You want to be angry. You kind of just want to sit in it. Sometimes you just need to sit with another person. And I think just as providers, that it's important for us to remind ourselves to really just check our mind and hearts at the door, and just make sure that we're not taking it personal.
Thank you, Chanel.
Because it's their lives, it's their journey.
Absolutely, 100%. Kind of tying all of this together, Kayla, so we see all these things that Christy and Chanel and Christine are talking about. And we know that like attendance in college, or working towards a degree, or working towards education or training, is a part of a lot of these support programs for those who are like 18 to 21 in that gap period. Can you talk about how this trauma really creates a barrier for student success with the students you work with, and how that might be a way that they become ineligible for a program because of what they've been through?
Kind of how everyone has, touched on, these youth, they've been a part of the system, and then they get out of the system. How Christine said, they're like, some of them are like, I'm done, I'm over this. And they get here, and though I have resources, though I may put on events for those who also were previously in foster care, part of the child welfare system, not everyone may want to be there. They're like, no, I'm good. I'm going to keep being independent. I'm going to survive. I'm going to do it on my own. And that can also be its own barrier because they're not getting all the resources and support that they could be getting to help them be successful here. And oftentimes then I get many of these students when they're in a crisis situation. I'm like, okay, well, these are some resources. These are some things I can help you with. And sometimes it's sad, but it takes that, that crisis situation for them to get to me. Or, and if we do put on events and then not many people come, then, it may be frustrating to me because I'm like, well, I want them to be a part of this and get this information, but, they may be dealing with other life things. I don't have housing. I don't have food. Or I need to work so I can go get housing and food. So there's many different obstacles. And on my end, all I try to do is, make sure, if there's a time that you feel comfortable coming to talk to me, my door is open. I have a listserv of those students who have turned in their DCF waiver through TCC. We do have a DCF waiver they can turn in to get their tuition paid for. So I have a listserv of those students, and I send out emails with resources or scholarships or different things. So even if I don't interact with them, you're still going to get an email. You're still going to know who I am. You're going to know my door's open. It's trying to provide that consistency with them because they might not have had someone consistent in their life. So trying to always, be there to know that if there is someone you need to reach out to, you can reach out to me. Someone may not have been consistent with you before, but I will try to be here to be consistent with you, to know that you do have some type of support if you do need it. So I think it all kind of comes together with the students and the barriers they face, that, once they get here, you never know what you're going to get. And me as a case manager, I just try to be that consistent person for them, to try to offer some type of support, whether they want it or they don't.
Thank you for that. And I think that it's kind of really echoing everything you all are saying in terms of consistently being there, even if they're not ready for it or that's not where they're at yet, letting them know that you are a resource and that you are someone who is going to say, I'm here, regardless of whether or not you want to take me up on that yet. Creating that stability that they may not have had access to prior.
So want to add, just looking at the different questions prior to 18 and even after 18, if they opted to stay in independent living, they should have an independent living case manager. Prior to 18, there are staff, like I said, there's staffings that occur. Those staffings also occur after they're 18. So I can only speak to like the CBC locally where I am. They had permanency staffings with permanency specialists, but staying in touch with that case manager to make sure that you are a participant in those staffings, because the youth are a part of those staffings. So they're able to hear everything that's going on. And I just encourage you all to stay in touch with those formal supports that they have within the system and be a part of the staffings and having those conversations with those youth and young adults. So there is opportunity to talk about supports in a formal manner.
Especially if you're one of the people who has been able to kind of unlock the key or be that person who they're willing to talk to, be that like facilitator between the communication points and those staffing. I think
and that also shows that individual that you're there for them, because it can be very intimidating for a youth or young adult to come to a table where there's 10 professionals and they may shut down and not be able to talk. So being next to them and letting them know that you're there to support them can be very helpful and beneficial. And again, talking to them, this is what this meeting is. And you could even be their voice. Do you have questions that you want answered? If you write them down for me, I'll ask the questions for you. Because again, it can be very intimidating for a youth and young adult to come into a meeting where you have 15 people at the table, even though everyone is there for the same purpose, but meeting them where they are and being that individual or that person.
Thank you. That's again, such great concrete advice, especially since we have so many people who work with these youths and young adults specifically on this call. Before we move on to what programs and services are available, I kind of want to tie this back in because we've been kind of talking generally about the population of youth aging out or have aged out. Back to the trafficking and exploitation aspect of, so we know all these factors. We have all of this knowledge about how this is just an incredibly challenging, traumatic experience in general. And then you add that layer of exploitation on top of it. You add that layer of having been through extreme victimization, extreme violence a lot of the times. I wanted to kind of open it up to my panelists in the field who work specifically with the trafficking side of things or have a lot of experience working with that. Can you just talk about how it kind of compounds or it intersects, how it works together to really create this barrier to leaving their exploitation system or creating a vacuum or an opportunity for them to enter if they did not enter the system of trafficking before because of the coercion present from the abusers coming into their lives at this point. Particularly looking at you, Chanel, probably.
Yeah, I figured that. I'm trying to listen to you and all these questions are coming up. So like, pay attention. But can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, you're totally fine. There are a lot of really great questions coming from the chat.
A couple.
Really appreciate that. Really just talking about, we've talked about all these factors in a pretty general sense towards the population because you work on a day-to-day basis with survivors of trafficking. How are all of these factors that Christine and Christy and Kayla are talking about, what does that mean for someone who has been coerced? What does that mean for the opportunity to either convince them to continue by their abuser or their trafficker? And what does it mean, in terms of creating a barrier to helping them recover in that way?
I think a lot of the times, like honestly, what I see is that, survivors oftentimes feel like they don't have a true way out. And a lot of the times the way out to them, it looks like just another switch of, like I spoke earlier about this power over dynamic. And so a lot of the times we see a re-traumatization even occurring through the providers who are supposed to be there to help you. And so a lot of the times, no, they're not being trafficked in these situations where the providers are offering them help, but a lot of the times they're still, re-exploiting them in a way and re-traumatizing them by using this power over dynamic, still being authoritative and not, channeling in more of like a power with, allowing them to kind of lead conversations and really talk about what their options is. And so like, for example, like when I first, one of my first clients that I went through the extended foster care process with her. So her options were I've never worked for DCF, so I don't know what the process looks like of how they choose your placement for you. But according to whatever system they use, like her option for coming out of going into extended foster care, her alternative was a homeless shelter. And so when she turned 18, she was going to leave a group home and go into a homeless shelter. And so the way that they kind of like tried to convince her that this was like a good idea is that they posed this false sense of freedom to her that, you could come and go as you please. And, you wouldn't have someone like over you and watching you. But like little did she know, like living in a homeless shelter comes with rules and regulations too. So she had a case manager that she had to meet with. She had a curfew. She had all these other rules and regulations that she was not fully aware of. And so I met with her the day, like Christmas Eve. And when I went to drop her off, her bags were sitting outside of her room. And so no explanation, no nothing. And so it took me like close to like midnight to really talk to them about like, she's not just someone here that is, living in a homeless shelter. Like she's through the extended foster care program. She just turned 18 like 2 weeks ago. I don't think that she was fully aware of like what the rules were. And they're like, well, she's living in this shelter. She needs to abide by all these rules that everyone else has. And so if, we weren't able to find alternative emergency shelter for her, what would be her alternative? And so, and we talked about that. And to her, it was, returning back to the lifestyle, returning back to her trafficker, because she knew then she would have a place to stay, and it wouldn't, there wasn't a fear of her being removed from this place. And so it's situations like that I have seen. I think that the extended foster care program has kind of grown over the years that I've been working with the Open Doors team. But I would say, like, when I first started, it was situations like that where they just weren't fully aware of what was available to them. And as a result, that option of, going, back into the life or remaining with the trafficker, it just seemed like that was the only way. Their choices seemed like they were very limited because they weren't just fully aware and understood what the options were available to them and what the rules were in extended foster care.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure with one story, you have hundreds in a similar situation because of the work you do. So I think it's really important to think about these programs. And that's what we're going to move on to talk about next is, we've talked a lot about what the gaps are. We've talked a lot about the trauma that's present. So I want to talk about what is there, what is happening, what is available, and why some of them can't access it, or why they feel they can't access it. So we know that there are supports. Christy talked a lot about them. She's posted a great resource list of like what's available. We've got some great questions that have been answered. But we also know that there's gaps. We know there's needs for this population that aren't met either because of their trauma responses or because of what has happened to them throughout their time in the care system or what is currently happening to them. So I want to talk about each one of you kind of talk about what you feel like is the most pressing or missing need in existing programs for those transitioning out. I know this is a huge topic that we could again spend a whole 4-hour webinar talking about, but Christy, I want to start with you. What do you think is the biggest gap in services for this population right now?
So, well, let's go back to basic needs and let's talk about making sure that that individual is having their basic needs met. We can't talk, sometimes it's difficult to have conversations about specialized trauma counseling. If that youth or young adult doesn't know where they're going to get, where they're going to be staying, where they're going to be getting food, let's talk about healthcare and making sure that, if someone has something that's going on, do they know how to make those appointments? So again, one of the biggest gaps is being that young adult or being that provider to help walk them through that and meeting them where they are. And, it might take you a little bit extra, some extra steps, but giving them those choices because they are an adult and having those difficult conversations, it can definitely be a challenge. There's not knowing every area of the state. I say that it's important to stay in contact with your CBC and have those discussions about housing and then start looking at counseling services. The one thing too, that I think that is the pandemic brought is there's opportunities for telehealth. So if there isn't a specialized provider for that youth that say lives in, I'm trying to think of somewhere maybe where there's not open, in one of the counties where there's not open doors. My experience is a lot with open doors. So there are opportunities for telehealth services and making sure that that individual has that support services as well as crisis services, because making sure that I've gotten a text in the middle of the night, hey, and is everything okay? Are you safe? And it may be something that can wait till the morning, but being there for them, making sure that they have that person that they can talk to no matter what the hours of the day is. I just can't express enough in my years in making sure that being there for that individual and having their one person, we can figure out the supports and the services, but really needing that one true champion that will be there for them.
Thank you for that. So we're going to kind of do a round robin on this one. Everyone's going to have an opportunity to kind of give their insight on this. Chanel, do you want to go ahead and go next?
So for me, I would say some of the gaps that I see is just not having access to like life skill supports and trainings. I think anytime anybody's turning 18, a lot of the times some of us do, but a lot of us don't. We don't have access to like life skills training, budget and financing, interviewing and job preparations. A lot of the times we don't have access to those things. The survivors and victims of trafficking don't have access to those things. And so it creates gaps as well. So I think those are some.
Thank you, Chanel. Christine?
Yeah, so I mean, when we're talking about gaps, I mean, I guess it's a little bit different for Broward because we have such a comprehensive system of care. Not that we don't always work on improving it, but some of the things that I can say that we've worked on to fill gaps has been life skills, education, obviously. You know, we're at every age out staffing that takes place in our county. So FLITE Center is represented at the age out staffing so that we can immediately introduce ourselves to the youth who are exiting care so that they have a phone number, they have access, they know where we're located, things like that. So they can already start getting connected with staff members from FLITE Center for things that they might need support for, either currently or in preparation for age out or post age out. Those are some of the ideas that I gave to some of the guardian ad litems that were having questions here, you know, how to support their youth is attend those staffings, attend those transition staffings, because a lot of times the gaps can be filled by having advocacy in the room for the young person prior to them aging out, or maybe even collecting the information for the young person on the services that are available, so that when this young person is kind of like lost later, you can say, you know what, I collected some of these numbers from this meeting. Let's start there. Let's work from that framework. You know, of course, emergency needs are huge. I saw some folks making comments about food stamps. Again, you know, it's really incredible what can happen when you build a system of care, and we are working at FLITE Center to be able to help other communities build systems of care. Why do I say that? Because we have DCF access, for example, outposted at FLITE Center, where those services are able, our youth are able to meet with that person, start getting all of their enrollment stuff happening right away. In the meantime, for some who commented that, you know, the youth are aging out without their food stamp card, for example, you know, great point. These are things that should happen beforehand. The youth need advocacy for this, and youth voice needs to be at the table. However, again, through our center, we do provide, we have a pantry, we do provide food upon them going into whatever their housing mechanism is going to be, you know, when they're aging out, so that we make sure all of their emergency needs are met. They have a bed, they have furniture, they have all of these things. One of the biggest gaps that we've been working on lately is healthcare and access to healthcare, really, because our young people are notorious for going to the emergency room and things like that. Even as it pertains to human trafficking, something may have happened that they need medical attention for, and they may see, you know, doctors' offices and big hospital systems as very intimidating for them. And so those are the gaps that we're looking at closing. But really, initially, you have to make sure that you are coordinating and keeping track of what services might this young person need, have advocacy in the room for those transition staffing, so that you make sure that before they're aging out, you're already working on connecting and coordinating some of these services while you have whoever the folks are in the room, or you can press folks for that information. You at least start to have some mechanism and framework for who those people are that you might need to contact on behalf of a youth should they age out without things in place.
Thank you for that, Christine. Last on this question, Kayla, I just wanted to kind of round out with you, since you are working with those who've been in the foster care system in schools. What are some of the gaps that you see?
Definitely what many have mentioned, housing, stable housing, food, support, assistance with, like Chanel said, life skills, filling out your FAFSA, getting a driver's license, knowing how to budget your money, you might qualify for your Pell Grant. Okay, you're getting this lump sum of money maybe you've never had before. How do you budget that out? How do you make sure you have enough for you to pay your rent and still have food? Are you going to get a job? If you don't want to work, how are you going to, support yourself? So there's many, many different obstacles, especially in a college setting when maybe as Christy said, independent living is a skill. And you've never been put into this. And now you're kind of thrown into the deep end, hoping to just make sure you're not drowning. So there are many, services and things like that there are gaps. And that's one thing, especially with at a community college, I try to make sure, I have connections with our DCF and their programs and other entities around the Tallahassee and Leon County area, especially those who live in the surrounding counties who, Tallahassee is the biggest county up here. So a lot of them come into town for services. So making sure I have these connections with different agencies around town. So if a student does need outside assistance, I can point them in the right direction so they can kind of close that gap a little and narrow it to get them the assistance they need.
Thank you all for that. Those are all great insights. And I know by the time we get to you, Kayla, we've had our panelists talk a lot about really great endpoints already. So we've talked about what's available. We've talked about what we feel like the gaps are. But let's talk about a little bit about barriers, especially with the existing programs, and particularly with our young adults who have been exploited or trafficked. We know that a large number of young adults or youths who are trafficked or exploited have criminal justice involvement. We also know that that's a huge barrier in terms of accessing formal services a lot of the times, or accessing education. There are some schools that don't view that as a barrier, but there are a lot of schools that do view that as a barrier to access education. And if that's something that's required to receive those services, that's a huge gap in services there specifically. I kind of want to start with talking about factors that act as barriers for survivors of trafficking, specifically within this population, beyond just the criminal justice involvement. Christy, because of your point, having worked with survivors of trafficking specifically, as well as being with DCF now, what are some of the ways you see that well, yes, these programs may exist, they may not be accessible to survivors?
It's really making sure that they have that champion to advocate for them to be able to have access to those support services. Everyone can do, here's what you're available for, check the box. But again, meeting the need of that survivor. Like, for example, there are adult programs for human trafficking survivors, but because say the placements department in child welfare, the independent living department within child welfare, don't have that experience with those adult programs, they may not be aware. So again, that opens up an additional resource, like I think of in around the state. So there's Salea Freedom, we have Her Song. But if you haven't done, and we talk about housing, if you haven't done placements in those types of programs, having that dialogue early and maybe bringing those people to the table so that they can explain, they can help with the employment, with the education. And it's really, I would advocate for individuals to participate in every area across the state has a human trafficking task force. So there are players that are at the table. So make sure that you are coming to the table to learn those supports, because if you can be the champion and even bringing it back to the child welfare agencies, to the guardian ad litem, and to that youth and young adult, so that they can make an informed choice of what's available. So again, I'm the chair of the Freedom 7 Human Trafficking Task Force. If you go on Ashley on the Attorney General's site, it has all the task force that are listed across the state, as well as there are human trafficking specialists within the Department of Children and Families, and they can help get you connected. So we have to make sure that we're having these ongoing dialogues and conversations to get the right people to the table to be able to help support that youth, because everyone works in their silos and what they know, and they're looking for those experts. I can't tell you how many times, through open doors and even my current role, because I am experienced still working with human trafficking survivors, how I get the calls in relation to, what's available for them. We talk about, I just see something in there in relation to Section 8 housing. There's VAWA, but if that's, and that's through HUD and through housing, but if you're not aware of it, you wouldn't even know to bring them to the table. So get the experts, bring them to the table, have those open conversations, have that open dialogue. And if you don't know, make sure that you have that person that you can reach out to that may be able to bring that expertise to the table to help those youth and young adults.
Absolutely. Having that facilitation point, having that connector is just a crucial, having that advocate really is what it is, having that person who's there.
I've had other cases of adults. That's, again, not my, HUD housing isn't my expertise, but I knew who I could call to help that young adult that was able to get that voucher transferred from one place to another. But that wasn't something I knew, but at least I knew who I could call to be able to then go back and advocate for that client to be able to get housing.
Absolutely. Chanel, I want to kind of move to you next, if possible. What are some of the barriers with the youth that you're working with the people who are survivors in terms of accessing programs? What are things that you've heard? What are things that you see regularly in terms of not being able to access as a survivor of trafficking?
I think housing is always like at the top of the list. I think a lot of the times because of, the way that, survivors oftentimes respond to traumas, a lot of the times they, kind of categorize these as, inappropriate behaviors. And so as a result, whenever they are trying to find appropriate placement, through extended foster care, they have to send their history along with them. And then, before meeting the person, they're reading this paper. And a lot of the times the way that the information is gathered, the information that's there is perceived as, this negative. And so they, don't have access to housing resources that are available to them because someone may see them as, not being in a good fit to be a part of a transitional program that may be available to survivors. There is also, barriers to employment that are, still present. A lot of that is due to some of their criminal background and records. And so, that's something that we also see a lot of the times with survivors of trafficking. And then because there is how can I put this? Sometimes I feel like there's a resistance to services because of the experience that they've already had with other providers. And so as a result, sometimes that creates a barrier as well, because, we have to explain to them and, try and take a different approach about, these services are helpful and that they are available to them. But a lot of the time they don't want to engage because they've already kind of gone through the system. And so to them, they perceive it as this is just a part of another system that really doesn't care about me anyway. And as a result, a lot of the times there are opportunities that become available to them, but they don't want to pursue it because of what has already happened to them in the past.
I think that's an excellent point. And again, it really talks about the need for having that advocate, having that external person, having the person who within the network is often the survivor mentor, or having someone who they can relate to with lived experience. And while that is particularly important for survivors of trafficking or exploitation, any survivor of trauma, having someone that they can connect with, who they feel is there for them, is such a crucial point in terms of service action. Kind of rounding this part out, I want to ask you, Christine, did you have anything you wanted to add from what Christy and Chanel brought up? Kayla, what about you?
I think they covered it pretty well.
Cool. Excellent. Well, yes, thank you. I think they did a great job talking about that specifically. We do have some questions from the chat as well that I wanted to kind of touch base on, specifically relating to programming before we loop back to things we talked about earlier. So we have someone who's looking to launch a new resource serving this population, specifically like those who are leaving the foster care system, and then also those who are in that population within trafficking. What are some must-know, must-do things? We do know, obviously, at this point that meeting them where they're at is the crucial number one step, and being consistent. But beyond that, what are some crucial things they must know to be successful and not just be another resource that's not being utilized fully?
I would connect with their foster care agency, because, you know, depending on that's in their area, because depending on where it is, it may be connecting them with a separate agency that does case management to make sure they have the support of that case management agency. Again, not knowing, you know, what program that they're ready to launch, but staying in connection with that foster care agency is going to be very, very important. And then also, again, I would get in contact with your DCF human trafficking specialist, because they can help bridge that gap as well.
Thank you. Yeah, again, those task force, particularly within the human trafficking realm, and connecting with, if you have an open doors provider, I definitely recommend connecting with your open doors provider in the region. If you don't, still contact us at the backbone side of things, and we'll try and see what we can do for connecting you with resources. That way we can kind of work to help you build that comprehensive program and not reinvent the wheel, but just improve it, essentially. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add on that question specifically? Perfect. Going off of that, we talked a little bit about the task forces, and Christy shared some really excellent website resources in the chat. Is there kind of like a resource or directory for these services for the full state, or is it like a county by county or circuit by circuit allocation?
Based on my experience, it's going to be a county by county, circuit by circuit, because there are so many places where there is information. You can go on, for example, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They're going to have resources and supports that are listed. Your local task force are going to have resources and support. Your specialists within DCF are going to have approved DCF services and support. So I would recommend staying in touch with your local task force. And there are some grassroots faith programs as well. And most of the time they seem to be connected there with the task force. And I did put in the chat the DCF website that then connected to those task force.
Thank you. Excellent. Just making sure we're getting everything that's been asked in the chat, or making sure that we're touching on all of these conversations. So looking back to trafficking, and especially with this population, what are some signs that when like our guardian ad litems are working with youth, or our welfare workers are working with youth, that the child they're working with may be vulnerable or is in a relationship that is unhealthy or could turn into a trafficking situation? I'm going to start with you, Chanel, but then I'll open it up to everyone else.
So in those situations, I think a lot of the times it's going to be a matter of just listening and knowing like what some of like the key words are. So if there's always, a lot of the times if you hear a person like constantly talking about, you know, a need to make money, or like somebody sent me money through PayPal or Cash App, and of course they won't say that it's, you know, because of X, Y, and Z. They may just say, oh, you know, they just did, they were just being nice. That raises, you know, that raises suspicion for me if a lot of the times the person that they're with is, you know, showing signs of like wanting to be controlling and like, you know, wanting access to their phones. if they are, wanting to kind of normalize certain like areas or like taking them to strip clubs, a lot of the times that raises suspicion for me, because I know sometimes, going to places like the strip club sometimes expand your boundaries and kind of creates a sense of normalcy. Like you're in this environment where, people are dancing for money. It's not really that bad. And a lot of the times, for trafficking survivors, that's like the gateway to exploitation. And so just kind of being aware of like what they're saying, like maybe even how they're identifying the boyfriend, if they are, using terms like daddy, sometimes that kind of raises suspicion as well. If they are just in a space where they're kind of normalizing like dating multiple people, as like it's an okay thing, a lot of the times that raises suspicion as well, that there could be either some grooming happening or the exploitation could already have started. A need to want to, if you hear persons talking about, needing to date like much older persons because they're like more stable, that would, raise suspicion as well. A lot of the times, when I talked about like the predatory helpfulness, when somebody is preying on you, you don't really see it because they're masking it for being helpful. And so a lot of the times if they're being like overly generous, the person that they're dating is like doing all these nice things. And they're like, right now they don't want anything in return, but how do you know that down the line that won't change and be something else? And so just to be cautious of, situations like that whenever they are in a space where they trust you enough to talk about what they have going on in their private lives, just pay attention.
Yeah, I would also add to like, just to piggyback on that, a lot of grooming usually takes place both figuratively speaking and physically speaking. So a lot of young ladies in particular, the perpetrator or the predator is usually like paying for them to look really great, get all of these things done, get their nails done, their hair done, their lashes done, look spectacular and fabulous all of the time, but they're also usually very controlling and protective. So it'll be, if they have to come to your center for something, they're getting dropped off, they're coming with them, this person's waiting for me outside, because there's not a lot of room in between for them to be free to do what they want. We've seen it sometimes in housing as well, when we're looking at putting them in housing, and if it's more restrictive housing that has more like rules or security and things like that, they'll be like, oh no, I don't want to go there, because again, they need somewhere that is flexible, that their person is the person that is trafficking them needs them to have availability to other clients and things like that. So there's always kind of like these little like indicators where we're like, just like Chanel said, you have to listen for some of the little like kind of clues and things, so that you can kind of pick up on what might be going on, and not that you want to assume that it's the case in every case, but unfortunately a lot of our young people are are exploited, and sometimes they don't even know. Like she said, sometimes the grooming, the emotional part starts like first building that trust, building that that alignment, and then it kind of escalates from there.
Thank you, Christine. Kayla, did you want to go ahead and add on to that?
Yes, I would like to say, from working in higher education and receiving these students, always meeting them where they are, paying attention, listening. We do have a victim advocate on campus, and just kind of assessing like, are they here for other services? Can I just kind of slide that in there? Oh, well, we also have a victim advocate. If you just need to talk about anything, here I can give you that information along with the other services you might need, if it's food or whatever the case may be, just so they have that information. Just, meeting them where they are, taking it at their pace, especially if they are disclosing to you, because, the more they tell to you, you're becoming someone they trust, and you don't want to run them off. So just making sure they're safe, assessing, how serious is this? So definitely picking up on those keywords like Christina, Chanel said, and then trying to see, you know, what help can I give them in this situation that's best for them.
Thank you. Christy, did you want to add anything to that conversation point about signs to watch for within this population for trafficking?
I think it's really, again, listening to that and to that that youth and young adult. You know, we talk about the standard, you know, are if they're leaving, are they coming back with money, tattoos? Are they coming, you know, they have multiple phones? But really, again, listening that deeper dive conversations, because you might have a youth that says, oh, I just made $20 for sending pictures of my feet. And you're like, hold up, feet aren't feet, feet turn into other things. And then the conversation is, well, everyone at school is, you know, or everyone's doing it. And being able to have, you know, that conversation of there's an opportunity that they're going to be, you know, they may be exploited, or someone may be wanting to take advantage of them. So really, really listening to that youth and young adult, again, gut. If something doesn't sound right, if something doesn't sound like it's okay, it's probably not. And so, you know, sometimes people's triggers are sometimes people, their gut feelings, you know, it may be down, but you as, again, that professional really listening to them and listening to what your gut is saying, and be able to have the real, and let me tell you, they're very hard conversations to have, because you don't want to break their trust, but having those real conversations, also, you know, once they know that you're genuinely and honestly there for them. They are tough conversations to have. They're tough conversations, you know, personally that I've had to have with and I don't want to have that conversation with them, but I need to in order to be able to protect them. And that shows your vulnerability, that you are going to be there for them when they need it.
Thank you. Those are all great points, especially for those of our attendees who aren't specifically as knowledgeable about the trafficking side of things, or about that victimization side of things. And especially knowing what we know, that there's such a prevalence among our youth in the child welfare and foster care system. So we're wrapping up here. I really appreciate all of the conversations that you have brought to the table. Again, this is something we could probably talk for hours about, with the knowledge and experience that each one of you brings to the table. Before we go and do our little bit of last bit of housekeeping things, I did want to ask, this was something I wanted to ask, but a couple people in the chat and the questions have also asked for it. Briefly, what do you feel is the most important takeaway for this audience? What small action can we do, even if we're not working in the field of trafficking, to make a difference here?
I would say continue your education and training. You know, my first client that I worked with that was involved in trafficking, I ended up going to the Human Trafficking Summit, and when it was still down at USF before we were doing virtually, and it was almost this aha moment. And as I was going through and just kind of soaking up everything, it really opened your eyes to, in another lens, to look at all the youth and young adults that you've been working with, and continue that education, continue that training, continue the conversation, continue the dialogue and conversations, because you don't know the impact that it may have with that youth, with that young adult, but also with other organizations that may be able to identify potential victims of trafficking. You know, everyone's been passionate for a long time, but we still need to have those conversations. I reiterate to my community, I'm like, these are our youth. These are our youth in our community. I think that one of the biggest things that anyone that does education and training, it's not the movie taken. Like, let's not sensationalize things, and let's have those real conversations.
Thank you, Christy. And not sensationalizing and having a real conversation is such a crucial point to make here, especially with this topic. Kayla, I want to move to you next on your last little piece of advice you'd like to give or take away.
I would say also, like Christy said, educating yourselves, not falling into stereotypes or thinking you know everything, or you know what it is. Each case, each individual, each youth is different. Their experience is different. What they go through is different. So every time you interact with one, take their story as their story. If they want to tell you their story, let them guide you to what they may need and what your purpose is, whether that's like me, maybe just providing resources and support and that's it, or whether they want this to be something consistent for them. So I always say, let them take the lead of what they want your interaction with them to be.
Thank you, Kayla. Christine, I'm going to go to you next for your last little takeaway or piece of advice.
So my advice is always going to center around the youth and really aligning yourself with them. They need to feel safe. They need to feel not judged, right? And they need advocacy. So again, how I kind of recommended for folks to collect the myriad of information and phone numbers and things along the way, because you never know when you come across where a young person might need this number or need that number or need some of these services that, for things that you might have been present for that seem like they're given to the youth. Like, here is this list of information, but sometimes our youth are so transient and moving from place to place, they may not hold on to those things. But really making sure that you're building that relationship and rapport with the young person. I mean, there's going to be nothing more important than that young person having someone that they can call if everything goes to the left or when everything goes to the left. And so you just have to be there for them, and you just have to make them feel safe and let them know that they are able to communicate with you, at any point that they may disclose something happened. It may not be initially, they may be feeling you out, but your consistency, your continuity in their life is going to be immensely important as they walk the journey, through surviving victimization or through aging out of the foster care system.
Thank you, Christine. And finally, Chanel, what is your last little takeaway you'd like to provide here?
I would like to just say, don't forget your why. Don't forget, why you made a decision to be a part of this work, and never stop working on yourself. I think that a lot of the times, we focus a lot, and it's important to focus on the people that we're serving, but we have to make sure that, we are in a space where we're able to serve. And I think sometimes we have, done the work for so long, sometimes we forget that it's important to stop, to take a breath, and to just refresh if you need to, restart if you need to, so that we don't lose sight of the reason why we got in this work. We are dealing with people's lives, their livelihoods, and it's just important that we are aware of, our hangups, and we're checking them at the door so that the work can be done and that the people can be served appropriately.
Thank you for that, Chanel. And I think that's remembering our why is something that we all need to do, because this is hard work. This is exhausting work a lot of the time, but it is something that definitely can make a huge impact in a lot of people's lives if we keep them centered in our thoughts. So I want to thank everyone. Again, all of you panelists were amazing. I really appreciate your time. Attendees, I really thank you for coming. You've been an amazing, engaging audience. I know I didn't get to every single question. There was a lot that came through. A lot came through the chat. A lot came through our question and answer feature. We will be sending out a certificate of attendance as well as an evaluation form for this webinar. And that's also an opportunity to follow up any questions. We're happy to do a little bit more research and kind of get some answers for you if you still need some answers. I do also want to kind of plug that we will be having another webinar next month, and I'll be focusing on working with men and boys in the trafficking realm, discussing what it looks like for our survivors who are male or assigned male at birth or identify as male, and how that is different and what it looks like attached to their gender and sex. To view any of our previous webinars, we've been doing a wide variety of topics. you can go to voicesforflorida.org. We do have all of them archived on there. This one will also be available on there after a few days. We'll provide you that information as well as a recording. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the contact@voicesforflorida email. We are happy to be a resource and happy to continue providing these education opportunities for you all. Thank you all.